The shovel hit something that shouldn't have been there, something that made a sound no rock, no root, no piece of buried debris should ever make. It was the sound of hollow metal, echoing from beneath 6 feet of Missouri soil that hadn't been disturbed in over a century. Thomas Whitman stopped digging immediately, his weathered hands trembling as he gripped the wooden handle. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his failing cornfield, but suddenly the familiar landscape felt alien, threatening. That sound, it was like striking a church bell buried in the earth, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through his bones and settle in his chest like a cold weight. He had been digging for water, desperate, foolish water. The well had run dry 3 weeks ago, and the county officials had already posted foreclosure notices on his property. After 47 years of working the same plot of land his grandfather had claimed, Thomas was about to lose everything. His wife Sarah had taken their last $20 to buy groceries, and their 8-year-old daughter Emma hadn't had a proper meal in days. The crops were dying, the livestock were dying, and Thomas himself felt like he was dying. Slowly, inevitably, like a man drowning in debt and drought. But that sound changed everything. Thomas knelt beside the hole he had dug, his heart hammering against his ribs. The earth around the metallic object was different somehow, darker, richer, as if it had been preserved by whatever lay beneath. He brushed away loose soil with his calloused fingers, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't natural. It wasn't supposed to be there. The surface was smooth, almost mirror-like, reflecting the dying light in ways that made his eyes water. But it was more than just the strange sheen of the metal. As Thomas touched it, he felt something he couldn't explain, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature, a pulse that seemed to match his own heartbeat, and beneath it all, a whisper of something vast and ancient and patient. His rational mind screamed at him to stop, to fill in the hole and pretend this had never happened. But desperation is a powerful force, and Thomas Whitman was a desperate man. His family was hungry. His land was dying. His future had been reduced to a single terrible certainty: failure. Now, staring at this impossible discovery, he felt the first flutter of something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Terrifying, irrational hope. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around the hole, and for just a moment Thomas could have sworn he heard voices. Not words exactly, but the cadence of human speech, rising and falling like a conversation held in a language he didn't recognize. The sound seemed to come from the metal itself, as if whatever was buried here was trying to communicate with him. Thomas looked around his property, at the withered corn stalks that should have been green and tall, at the empty chicken coop where his prized hens had once laid eggs, at the small farmhouse where his wife and daughter waited for him to somehow, miraculously, save them all. The bank would come in the morning. The sheriff would follow within the week. Unless something changed dramatically, the Whitman family would be homeless before the first snow. He made his decision. Thomas drove the shovel back into the earth, and this time when it struck the buried object, the sound was different, clearer, more insistent, almost eager. As he worked to uncover whatever lay beneath his failing farm, Thomas Whitman couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just digging randomly anymore. Something was guiding him, pulling him toward a discovery that would either save his family or destroy them completely. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded him of blood and treasure. And somewhere beneath his feet, something ancient and powerful was waiting to be found. What Thomas Whitman discovered that evening would not only change his life forever, it would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, fate, and the mysterious forces that shape human destiny. Before we dive deeper into Thomas's incredible discovery, I need you to do something for me. If you're intrigued by mysterious stories that challenge everything you think you know about reality, please hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what you're about to hear will leave you questioning the very nature of fate and fortune. This is a story that needs to be shared, and I promise you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let me tell you about Thomas Whitman. In the heart of Missouri, where the plains stretch endlessly toward horizons that promise everything and deliver little, Thomas had spent his entire adult life fighting a losing battle against nature, economics, and time itself. At 53 years old, his face was a roadmap of every drought, every failed harvest, every sleepless night spent calculating bills that never quite got paid. The Whitman farm sat on 160 acres that had once been his grandfather's pride and joy. Old Henry Whitman had claimed this land during the homestead era, building the modest farmhouse with his own hands and establishing a legacy he believed would last for generations. He had been wrong about the legacy. but he couldn't have predicted the economic forces that would eventually strangle small family farms like a slow, merciless noose. Thomas had inherited the property along with its debts, its dreams, and its curse of never quite being enough. Every year brought new challenges: equipment breakdowns, veterinary bills, seed costs that seemed to double overnight, and weather patterns that grew increasingly unpredictable. But Thomas persevered because he had no choice. This land was all he knew, all he had ever wanted to know. His wife, Sarah, had married him 24 years ago, back when the farm still turned a modest profit and the future seemed manageable. She was a schoolteacher then, bringing in a steady income that supplemented their agricultural earnings. But budget cuts had eliminated her position 3 years ago, and since then the Whitmans had been sliding steadily toward financial ruin. Their daughter Emma was the light of their lives, a bright 8-year-old with her mother's kind eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She didn't fully understand why Daddy worked from sunrise to sunset and still couldn't afford new school clothes, why Mommy sometimes cried when she thought no one was looking, or why they ate beans and rice so often that she had started calling them Whitman family specials. But Emma believed in her father with the absolute faith that only children possess. When other kids at school talked about their parents' jobs in town, Emma proudly announced that her daddy was a farmer who grew food to feed the world. She didn't know that the world was no longer interested in what Thomas Whitman could grow. The drought had started in early spring, just when the winter wheat should have been thriving. Day after day, Thomas watched clear skies that mocked his prayers for rain. The irrigation system had failed in May, and the cost of repairs was beyond his reach. The corn he had planted with his last borrowed money was now little more than brown stalks that rustled like old bones in the wind. Thomas was a man of quiet faith, raised in the Methodist tradition of hard work and humble acceptance of God's will. He attended services every Sunday at the small white church in town, where Pastor Mitchell offered prayers for the farming community, and Thomas tried to find comfort in familiar hymns that spoke of better days ahead. But lately, Thomas found it harder and harder to reconcile his belief in a loving God with the crushing reality of his circumstances. The foreclosure notice had arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a nervous young man who couldn't meet Thomas's eyes as he handed over the legal documents. The bank was calling in the mortgage loan, effective in 30 days. Unless Thomas could produce $47,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million, the farm would be auctioned to pay his debts. That night, Sarah had held him while he wept for the first time since his father's funeral. They had talked about options that weren't really options. Moving to town, finding work at the factory, starting over at an age when starting over seemed impossible. Sarah had been brave, optimistic even, talking about new opportunities and different kinds of happiness. But Thomas knew she was putting on an act for his sake, just as he tried to stay strong for hers. Emma had found them at the kitchen table at midnight, surrounded by unpaid bills and legal papers they couldn't afford to fight. She had climbed onto her father's lap without saying a word, and the three of them had sat there in the quiet darkness, holding on to each other as if they could prevent the inevitable through sheer force of love. The next morning, Thomas had made a desperate decision. If the county wouldn't approve a new well permit, he would dig one himself. It was probably illegal, definitely dangerous, and almost certainly futile, but it was action, and action felt better than surrender. He had chosen a spot near the back of his property, where his grandfather used to claim the water table ran closest to the surface. Thomas had no scientific basis for this belief, no geological surveys or professional advice. He had only desperation, determination, and a rusty shovel that had belonged to 3 generations of Whitman men. For 6 hours, he had dug in the hard-packed earth, his muscles screaming and his lungs burning with each breath. The hole grew deeper, but there was no sign of water, no hint of the miracle he needed to save his family's future. And then his shovel had struck that impossible metallic surface, and everything changed. Standing at the edge of his discovery, dirt under his fingernails and sweat staining his workshirt, Thomas Whitman was about to uncover something that would transform not just his life, but his understanding of how the universe really works. Some discoveries change everything, and this was going to be one of them. Thomas spent the next hour carefully excavating around the mysterious metal surface, working with the precision of an archaeologist, despite having no training beyond a lifetime of farming. Each scoop of earth revealed more of whatever lay buried beneath his property, and with each revelation, his sense of unease grew stronger. The object was larger than he had initially thought. Much larger. What had seemed like a simple metal plate was actually the corner of something rectangular, something that extended deep into the earth in all directions. The surface remained perfectly smooth, despite being buried for what must have been decades, possibly centuries. No rust, no corrosion, no signs of age or weathering. As the sun began to set, Thomas realized he had uncovered roughly 4 feet by 3 feet of the metallic surface, and there was still more to go. The material seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an optical illusion that made it difficult to judge depth and distance. When he ran his hands across it, the metal was warm to the touch, not hot, but warmer than it should have been given that it had been buried 6 feet underground. But the warmth wasn't the strangest part. Every few minutes, Thomas felt vibrations coming from beneath the metal surface. They weren't random tremors or the settling of buried objects. These vibrations came in patterns, rhythmic pulses that seemed almost deliberate. Sometimes they were rapid, like the beating of an excited heart. Other times they were slow and steady, like the breathing of something massive and patient. Thomas tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, that exhaustion and desperation were making him paranoid. But when he pressed his ear against the metal surface, he could hear something that made his blood run cold. Machinery. The unmistakable sound of complex mechanical systems operating somewhere far below. Gears turning, pistons moving, electronic components humming with energy. It sounded like a factory or a power plant, running smoothly and efficiently in a space that couldn't possibly exist. At one point, while Thomas was clearing dirt from what appeared to be a seam or joint in the metal surface, he heard something that made him jump back from the hole as if he had been electrocuted. Voices. Human voices speaking in low, urgent tones. The words were muffled by layers of metal and earth, making it impossible to understand what was being said, or even what language was being spoken. But the cadence was unmistakably human. People having a conversation, making decisions, coordinating activities. Thomas's hands were shaking now. He looked around his property, half expecting to see government vehicles or military personnel surrounding his farm. But there was nothing except the familiar landscape of his failing crops and the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Who was down there? How long had they been there? And why had they chosen to hide beneath his worthless piece of Missouri farmland? The rational part of Thomas's mind suggested several explanations. Maybe it was some kind of military installation from World War II, a forgotten bunker or communications facility that had been classified and abandoned. Maybe it was connected to the Cold War, a relic of the era when the government had built secret facilities throughout the Midwest to protect against nuclear attack. But those explanations didn't account for the voices, the active machinery, the sense that whatever was down there was very much alive and operational. As Thomas continued digging, he discovered that the metal surface wasn't uniform. In several places there were what appeared to be access panels or maintenance hatches, outlined by thin seams that were almost invisible unless you knew where to look. One of these panels was different from the others, larger, more elaborate, with what might have been a locking mechanism or control interface. When Thomas touched this particular panel, it responded. The entire surface beneath his feet began to vibrate more intensely, and somewhere in the depths below, he heard the sound of heavy machinery coming to life. It was like standing on top of a sleeping giant that was beginning to wake up. Then the panel began to glow. It started as a faint phosphorescence around the edges, barely visible in the gathering darkness. But within seconds, the glow intensified, casting an eerie blue-white light that illuminated Thomas's face and hands. The light pulsed in sync with the mechanical sounds below, as if the entire system was responding to his presence. Thomas should have run. Every instinct screamed at him to fill in the hole, forget what he had seen, and never speak of this discovery to anyone. But desperation makes people do dangerous things, and Thomas Whitman was beyond desperate. His family was going to lose their home in less than a month. His daughter would have to leave the only life she had ever known. His wife would have to abandon the community where she had taught school for 15 years. Everything they had worked for, everything they were, would be erased by financial circumstances beyond their control, unless whatever was buried beneath his farm could somehow change their situation. Thomas made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He reached down and pressed his palm against the glowing panel. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire metallic surface erupted in brilliant light, so bright that Thomas had to shield his eyes. The mechanical sounds below became a roar of activity, as if enormous systems were activating throughout whatever complex lay hidden beneath his property. And then, from somewhere impossibly deep underground, came a sound that turned Thomas's blood to ice. A voice, amplified by unknown technology, speaking in perfect, unaccented English. Thomas Whitman of 1247 Rural Route 7, Jasper County, Missouri. We have been waiting for you. The voice knew his name. It knew his address. And somehow, impossibly, it had been waiting for him to find it. Thomas stumbled backward from the hole, his heart hammering against his ribs. The glowing light continued to pulse beneath his feet, and the voice continued speaking, though he could no longer make out the words over the roar of blood in his ears. Whatever he had discovered, it was not a relic of past wars or abandoned government projects. This was something active, something intelligent, and something that had been expecting him specifically to dig in exactly this spot at exactly this time. Thomas Whitman had been looking for water to save his farm. Instead, he had found something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about reality itself. Thomas stood frozen at the edge of the glowing hole, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The voice from below had fallen silent, but the mechanical sounds continued, growing more complex and purposeful with each passing moment. Whatever was down there was fully awake now, and it was preparing for something. "Sarah," Thomas whispered, then louder, "Sarah." His wife appeared at the back door of the farmhouse, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Thomas, what's wrong? It's getting dark. You need to come inside." "Sarah, I need you to come here, now. And bring Emma." Something in his voice must have conveyed the urgency of the situation, because Sarah didn't argue. She disappeared back into the house, and moments later she and Emma were walking across the yard, their faces illuminated by the strange blue-white glow emanating from the hole. "Daddy, what is that?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Children, Thomas realized, adapted to impossibility much faster than adults. Sarah reached the edge of the excavation and stopped dead in her tracks. "Thomas, what have you done?" Before he could answer, the voice from below spoke again, and this time it was clearly addressing all three of them. "Whitman family, please do not be afraid. We mean you no harm. We have been waiting a very long time to make contact, and circumstances have finally aligned to make this meeting possible." Sarah grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her back from the hole. "Thomas, we need to call the police or the FBI or somebody." "And tell them what?" Thomas asked. "That there are people living under our cornfield? That they know our names and have been waiting for us? Who's going to believe that?" The voice continued, patient and calm. "Mrs. Whitman, your skepticism is understandable and appropriate. However, calling authorities would complicate matters unnecessarily and delay the assistance we are prepared to offer your family." "Assistance?" Thomas found his voice again. "What kind of assistance?" "The kind that will resolve your current financial difficulties and secure your family's future on this property, which has served as our monitoring station for the past 127 years. Sarah stared at Thomas. "Monitoring station? Thomas, what is this place? What have you gotten us into?" Before anyone could respond, they heard the sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel road that led to their farm. Headlights swept across the yard as a pickup truck pulled into their driveway. Thomas recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Harold Brennan, the wealthiest landowner in the county, and the man who had been pressuring Thomas to sell the farm for the past 2 years. "Thomas," Harold called out as he climbed down from his truck. "Saw some strange lights from the road, thought you might be having some kind of emergency." Harold Brennan was everything Thomas was not: successful, confident, connected to the right people in the right places. He owned over 3,000 acres of prime agricultural land, had contracts with major food processing companies, and drove a truck that cost more than Thomas made in a good year. He was also a man who didn't believe in coincidences, and his timing tonight was suspiciously convenient. "Everything's fine, Harold," Thomas called back, positioning himself between his neighbor and the glowing hole. "Just doing some work on a drainage issue." But Harold was already walking toward them, his eyes fixed on the unusual light coming from the excavation. "That's some kind of drainage work, Thomas. Never seen anything quite like it." The voice from below spoke again, but this time only Thomas could hear it, as if it was being transmitted directly into his mind rather than through the air. "Mr. Whitman, this individual represents a complication. His presence here is not accidental. He has been monitoring your property for external interests that are not aligned with your family's welfare." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Harold, I think you should probably head home now. It's getting late and—" "Actually, Thomas, I think I should stay." Harold's voice had changed, become more formal, more authoritative. I've been instructed to investigate any unusual activity on this property, and what I'm seeing here definitely qualifies as unusual. Instructed by who? Sarah demanded. Harold smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. Let's just say there are people who take a very serious interest in certain types of discoveries, particularly when they occur on land that's about to change ownership. The pieces began falling into place in Thomas's mind. Harold's frequent offers to buy the farm, always at prices far below market value, his detailed knowledge of Thomas's financial situation, his convenient appearance tonight, just as something extraordinary was being revealed. "You've been watching us," Thomas said. "You knew something was here." "Not exactly," Harold admitted. "But we knew something might be here. This area has generated some interesting readings over the years. Geological anomalies, electromagnetic signatures, things that suggested the presence of unknown technology." The voice in Thomas's mind became more urgent. "He represents a private consortium that has been systematically acquiring properties in this region based on classified government surveys from the 1950s. They are not interested in your welfare, only in gaining control of our facility." Thomas looked at his wife and daughter, then at Harold Brennan, then down at the glowing hole that had changed everything. Suddenly he understood that this wasn't just about saving his farm anymore. This was about choosing sides in a conflict he didn't fully understand, between forces he couldn't see, with stakes that might extend far beyond his family's immediate survival. "Harold," Thomas said slowly, "I think you need to leave our property. Now." Harold's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Thomas. This discovery is too important to be left in the hands of—" He paused, looking at the struggling farm, the modest house, the family in worn clothes. "Well, in the hands of people who don't understand its significance." Emma stepped closer to her father, and Thomas felt something fundamental shift inside him. Whatever was happening here, whatever he had uncovered, it belonged to his family. It had been waiting beneath his land, using his name, calling to him specifically. "The choice is yours, Mr. Whitman," the voice said in his mind. "But choose quickly. Time is running out, and not everyone who seeks what lies beneath your land has your family's best interests at heart." Thomas looked down at the glowing panel, then back at Harold Brennan's expectant face. Everything he had ever believed about his quiet life as a struggling farmer was about to change forever. The tension in the air was electric, crackling with potential energy as three different forces converged on Thomas Whitman's modest farm. Harold Brennan's hand remained poised near his jacket pocket. Sarah clutched Emma protectively, and somewhere beneath their feet, unknown technology hummed with increasing intensity. Thomas made his decision. "I choose my family," he said aloud, and pressed both hands firmly against the glowing panel. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. The entire metallic surface erupted in brilliant light, but instead of being blinding, the illumination seemed to penetrate everything around them with perfect clarity. Thomas could see Harold reaching for what was definitely a weapon, could see his wife's fear transforming into determination, could see his daughter's eyes wide with wonder rather than terror, and then the ground began to move. Not an earthquake, something far more controlled and purposeful. The earth around the excavation site split along invisible seams, revealing that what Thomas had uncovered wasn't just a buried facility. It was the top of something massive, something that had been waiting for over a century to reveal itself. As sections of his cornfield folded back like the petals of an enormous mechanical flower, a structure rose from beneath the Missouri soil. It was sleek, organic in its curves, yet obviously technological, constructed from the same warm metal Thomas had first touched. But the most remarkable thing about it wasn't its size or its impossible presence beneath his farm. It was beautiful. The structure seemed to breathe with soft, pulsing lights that reminded Thomas of fireflies on summer evenings, of aurora borealis, of something alive and benevolent and utterly beyond human understanding. As it continued rising, reaching perhaps 30 feet above ground level, Thomas realized he was looking at architecture unlike anything that existed in any human civilization. Harold Brennan had his weapon drawn now, a sleek black pistol that looked as advanced as the structure emerging from the earth. "Step away from the device, Thomas. This is bigger than you understand, bigger than your family's problems." "No," Sarah said, surprising everyone, including herself. "Whatever this is, it chose us. It's been waiting under our land, protecting our family, even when we didn't know it existed." The voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't just in Thomas's mind. It filled the air around them, warm and resonant. coming from speakers built into the risen structure. Harold Brennan, Employee Identification Number 7749 Delta Meridian Acquisition Corporation. You are trespassing on sovereign territory. Please withdraw immediately. Harold's face went pale. How do you know my employee number? That information is classified at the highest levels. We have been monitoring your organization's activities since 1953, when your predecessors first detected our presence. Your systematic acquisition of properties in this region has been noted and cataloged. Your intentions toward our hosts, the Whitman family, are also known and found to be hostile. Thomas felt a surge of understanding. You've been protecting us. The failed crops this year, the drought. You were trying to bring me to this point, weren't you? You needed me to dig here, to find you. Correct, Thomas Whitman. Our facility requires periodic calibration with surface dwellers who possess certain genetic markers. Your family line carries specific traits that make you ideal partners for our mission. What mission? Emma asked, her young voice clear and unafraid. The structure pulsed with warmer light as if responding to the child's question with affection. We are guardians, Emma Whitman. We protect this world from forces that would damage it, forces that often come from beyond your planet. Your family's farm sits at the center of a continental defense grid that monitors and neutralizes extraterrestrial threats. Harold laughed harshly. Aliens. Of course. Thomas, don't listen to this thing. It's some kind of experimental AI, probably Soviet technology from the Cold War. The real threat here is terrestrial, not extraterrestrial. But even as Harold spoke, the night sky above them began to change. What Thomas had assumed were stars were moving, shifting position, growing brighter. And they were moving in formation, with purpose and intelligence. The Meridian Corporation has been compromised, the voice continued calmly. Their attempts to acquire our monitoring stations throughout the Midwest have attracted unwanted attention from entities that do not have Earth's best interests at heart. The lights in the sky were definitely getting brighter, and Thomas could make out shapes now, geometric forms that hurt to look at directly, vessels that seemed to bend space around them as they descended toward Earth. We have maintained planetary security for over 2,000 years, the voice explained. But we cannot operate effectively while remaining completely hidden. We need human partners, families who can serve as liaisons between our technology and your species. The Whitman family has been selected for this honor. Sarah looked at her husband, then at their daughter, then at the impossible scene unfolding around them. What does that mean exactly? What would we have to do? Your farm would become a permanent monitoring station, disguised as ordinary agricultural land. Your financial difficulties would be resolved through our advanced agricultural technologies, making this property the most productive farm in the region. Emma would receive education in sciences beyond current human understanding, preparing her to eventually take over the liaison role. Harold raised his weapon. I can't let this happen. There are too many interests involved, too much money at stake. But before he could fire, the descending alien vessels responded to his threatening gesture. A beam of soft blue light enveloped Harold, and he simply stopped. Not paralyzed, not unconscious, but paused, as if someone had pressed a cosmic pause button on his personal timeline. He will be unharmed, the voice assured them, but his memories of this encounter will be modified to ensure he reports only equipment malfunctions and natural gas deposits when he returns to his employers. Thomas looked at his family, standing in the glow of technology that could save their farm, their future, their world. Above them, alien vessels hung in the Missouri sky like silver promises. Beneath them, guardians who had protected Earth since before recorded history were offering his family a partnership that would span generations. What do we say? Thomas asked Sarah. His wife smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen on her face in months. We say yes, Thomas. We say yes to impossible things, to guardian angels who live underground, to a future where our daughter helps protect the world. Emma clapped her hands with delight. Does this mean we get to keep the farm, Daddy? Thomas Whitman, poor farmer from Missouri, knelt down and hugged his daughter. Yes, sweetheart, we get to keep the farm. And maybe we get to help keep the whole world safe, too. 6 months later, Thomas Whitman stood in the same spot where he had first struck that mysterious metallic surface, but everything around him had changed. The cornfields stretched endlessly in all directions, green and healthy and impossibly productive. The irrigation systems worked perfectly, drawing from underground reservoirs that never seemed to run dry. The mortgage had been paid in full, along with all their other debts, through agricultural yields that broke every county record. To outside observers, the Whitmans had simply experienced an extraordinary run of good luck. The soil composition had improved dramatically due to what agricultural inspectors called beneficial mineral deposits. The weather patterns had shifted favorably. Thomas had discovered a natural aquifer that supplied abundant water for irrigation. Everything had a rational, scientific explanation that satisfied the curious and the skeptical alike. But Thomas knew the truth. Every morning when he walked through his fields, he could feel the gentle hum of advanced technology working beneath the soil, optimizing growth patterns, managing nutrient distribution, protecting his crops from disease and pests. The underground facility remained invisible to everyone except his family, but its presence transformed everything it touched. Emma had started attending special educational sessions in the evenings, learning about physics and biology and astronomy from teachers who weren't entirely human. She was already speaking about concepts that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science for decades, yet she remained a normal, happy 8-year-old who loved playing with the farm's chickens and helping her mother in the garden. Sarah had embraced their new role as guardians with the same practical determination she brought to everything else. She managed the day-to-day operations of their cover story, coordinating with agricultural officials and maintaining the facade of a remarkably successful but perfectly ordinary family farm. And Thomas? Thomas had found something he hadn't experienced since his grandfather's time: peace. Not just financial security, though that was certainly part of it. He had found purpose beyond mere survival, meaning beyond the endless cycle of planting and harvesting and hoping for enough rain. He was protecting his world, not just his farm, not just his family, but his entire planet. Every night when he looked up at the stars, Thomas knew that some of those lights represented potential threats, entities that viewed Earth as a resource to be exploited, rather than a home to be cherished. But he also knew that beneath his feet, ancient guardians maintained their vigilant watch, and that his family played a small but crucial role in keeping humanity safe. The lesson Thomas had learned wasn't about the rewards of faith or hard work, though both had played their part in his story. It was about the power of choosing hope over despair, about embracing impossible possibilities when conventional solutions had failed. Sometimes, when life pushes you to the very edge of what you can endure, when every door seems closed and every path blocked, the universe offers you something extraordinary. Not a guarantee, not a promise, but an opportunity. The opportunity to believe that there are forces working for good in the world, that guardian angels come in forms we never expect, and that ordinary people can be chosen for extraordinary purposes. Thomas Whitman had been a poor farmer facing foreclosure. Now he was a guardian of Earth, a protector of humanity, a man whose failing corn crop had hidden one of the most important secrets in human history. His story reminds us that we never know what lies beneath the surface of our struggles, what possibilities wait to be discovered in our darkest moments. The next time you face impossible circumstances, remember Thomas and his family. Remember that sometimes the ground beneath our feet holds miracles we never imagined. Remember that desperation can lead to discovery, that faith can be rewarded in ways we never expected, and that the universe has a mysterious way of providing exactly what we need, exactly when we need it most. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that miracles are still possible in our world, please share it with others who might need to hear this message. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are made by the most ordinary people in the most unexpected places. What lies beneath the surface of your own life? What miracles are waiting to be uncovered?